So for most of my school life, I used to study, very, very hard, pretty hard. I would spend dozens of hours on each subject. I would spend a lot of time on the assignments, on the exams. I would make nice notes. I would do test questions, practice hard, but in some subjects I would do reasonably well, quite well. But in other subjects I would do very, very poorly, despite putting in a ton of time, And I used to think maybe it was genetics. Maybe, I was not good at learning certain subjects. I was more inclined to certain subjects than others. But then I realized it's because I was missing this one super important thing that honestly most students don't even do. So recently I've been reading this book called Ultra Learning by Scott Young. And reading this book allowed me to understand this concept more in depth. So Ultra Learning is basically like how to learn any skill very, very fast by the author Scott Young. Very interesting book. And principle one of Ultra Learning principle one, the most important principle, is meta learning. And I believe most students are not meta learning. So this is what this video is going to be about. I'm going to explain what meta learning is and why it's the key not only to do well in all your subjects, but to spend less time studying, to enjoy studying a lot more. And actually this meta learning is transferable to your entire life. It will literally improve every aspect of your life. And I asked myself, what is the one thing that separates the top students from everyone else? And I think one of the things is meta learning. So basically what meta learning is meta learning is learning how to learn. So learning how to learn is not just about, study hacks and focus and discipline and all that. All that stuff is important, but meta learning goes much deeper than you think, and it applies for individual subjects. So I'm going to explain what that is. First of all, if you don't know me, I'm Penrose. If you want more videos like this, subscribe. And by the way, I've got a Discord server. I'm in there pretty much every day, pretty active. Check out the link in the description. So here's the thing, people study, people learn, but they never learn how to learn. And this is what this chapter in this book talks about, meta learning. Meta learning is basically creating a map for the thing you're gonna learn. So let's say, for example, you're learning maths. When you're learning maths, it's not just about going in there, studying maths, doing practice questions. It's also about learning how to actually learn maths in the first place and creating a map of the entire subject to kind of understand how you should approach it and how you should learn it in the first place. If you don't do this, you're gonna waste a ton of time doing the wrong techniques, learning the wrong things. So let me give you an example. When I first started learning languages, I thought, okay, what is the best way to learn languages? And immediately I thought of Duolingo because Duolingo is like what everyone uses to learn languages. I thought, okay, the way to learn languages is just to study, like how I will do any other subject, right? Just study. So I got Duolingo and I started paying more attention in Spanish class. I thought those two things would enable me to do really well in Spanish. But then I started watching YouTubers on language learning and learning how to actually approach language learning. And I found out that actually Duolingo and classes are the worst way to learn languages, because languages are learned completely different from every other subject in school. Basically, languages are learned through just getting a ton of input into your brain. So watching a ton of TV, reading a ton of books. Of course, it goes much deeper than this. But I realized that learning languages was different to learning every other subject. So basically what I did was I went onto YouTube and I meta learned. I learned how to learn languages. And that enabled me to completely change my approach to language learning and actually start making some fast progress. Because maybe you're familiar with this. Back in high school, I was in this program called the IB, and we had to learn languages for 4 years in high school. But I promise you, 99% of people, when they left the education system, despite spending, 10 hours at least a week on a language, they could not speak the language at all. And it's because they were spending a ton of time learning the language, but they didn't actually learn how to learn languages. Therefore, they were doing all the wrong things. So the book talks about the 10% rule with learning. Basically, you should spend 10% of your time in learning something, in learning how to learn that thing. So for example, with maths, I remember in maths, there was this guy who in my first year of university, he was learning maths. He studied hard for maths, man. He pretty much reviewed every single lecture multiple times. He knew all the concepts well. I thought he was gonna get the highest grade in the class. He ended up failing. It's because he spent no time meta learning. He didn't learn how to learn maths, because maths is completely different to, for example, economics. Maths is about understanding concepts and then being able to apply them in practice questions. So when you learn how to learn maths, you learn that with maths, you just have to do a fuck ton of practice questions, because knowledge in maths comes from doing the practice questions and being able to solve problems. The book actually talks about this as a chapter on directness, where you have to actually get direct experience. But maths is different than economics, for example. Economics is probably more memorization. So this book talks about 3 things that you may need for a subject when it comes to meta learning. You may have to learn facts, you may have to learn procedures, and you may have to learn concepts. So for example, with maths, there are some, you have to understand concepts. You have to understand how integrals work. You have to understand how the sine rule works. You have to understand all these concepts. Then there are also facts. You have to memorize things in maths. Your teacher might give you some formulas, but you also have to memorize, the unit circle. You have to memorize, different derivatives, different integrals. And you also have to understand procedures in maths. And I think procedures is the biggest thing in maths that sets it apart from other learning. So you have to do a ton of practice questions to get to the point where you can naturally do maths. So for me, English was probably the worst subject in high school. I sucked at it, but I ended up doing pretty well on it in English because I started meta learning. I started learning how to actually analyze literature, how to actually learn how to write essays. And it was a completely different learning approach than I was used to in science and maths. So I thought I was a pretty good learner. I thought I studied pretty well, but I couldn't study well in other things like English. So you have to realize that it's not just about learning, it's about how every single skill, every single subject is learned in a different way. And so often it's not that you're not an English person, you're not a maths person. It's often that you just don't know the correct techniques to actually approach that subject. You might be really good at economics or something, but you might suck at maths simply because you're trying to use economics learning principles in maths. So how exactly do you meta learn? Research, go into YouTube, learn, search how to learn maths, go into read articles, all that kind of stuff. Essentially reading this book, Ultra Learning, is like meta learning. I'm learning how to learn. So you can do that as well. You can learn how to learn because learning itself is a skill. And this is the crazy thing. As you learn more subjects and you learn how to learn individual things, your ability to learn gets better. Every time you learn a brand new subject, you are better at learning, and so you actually learn it a lot better. I noticed that the first language I learned was pretty hard, Spanish. I had to learn how to learn languages. But when I started learning a new language, after that I started learning Italian, it was so much easier because I had already learned Spanish. Now, okay, this could be because the languages are related. Okay, let's say, for example, I started learning Russian. Even though Russian was a much harder language than Spanish, I learned it a lot faster because I already knew how to learn. I had practiced learning. I knew how to approach subjects. I knew how to meta learn. So as you learn more subjects, your skills grow, your ability to learn grows, your confidence grows because you understand the learning process. You understand that learning is not this linear thing. Sometimes you'll make mistakes, sometimes you go backwards, sometimes you will fail. That's the thing. If students don't learn how to learn different subjects, they get very frustrated when they try to learn something new. You see so many people give up in the gym, for example, because they're like, oh man, I'm not making any progress. It's because they don't know that learning actually is a slow process and it involves making mistakes, going backwards. So, there are these videos online, people are like, oh man, I can't study, I suck at learning. Please, osmosis, put the book into my brain. So yeah, every subject is learnable. This is the big realization that you need to make. And the crazy thing is that I'm starting to realize is that literally everything is a skill. So I think that students who are good at studying subjects are some of the best people to be developing a fitness habit, for example. Because I remember when I first started developing a fitness habit, I actually found it fairly easy. I got into the habit relatively easily. Because I had learned how to learn, I knew that when I started doing fitness and exercising, I knew that I could be watching YouTube videos and learning different, learning how to actually, lift the weight, learning how to eat properly, learning how to develop a habit. So it was actually very easy for me to develop a fitness habit. And when you learn different subjects, you learn focus, you learn discipline, you learn how to learn. So one of the reasons why I was pretty consistent with this YouTube channel and grew relatively fast is because I had already developed learning habits, learning skills through learning a bunch of different subjects in school, through learning how to do a fitness habit, through learning languages. So I had already had this confidence when it came to learning. So like I said, everything is a skill. And, for example, charisma, social skills, talking to people is literally a skill. You know, people think, you know, you're either born charismatic or you're not, but really your ability to talk to people is literally a skill. So if you learn a bunch of different subjects and you learn how to learn, you realize that speaking to people is also a skill. Like charisma is like a skill stack of a bunch of different skills. It's like power, presence, warmth, courage, eye contact, body posture, all these different things stacked on top of each other. And if you get good at learning, then you can actually get good at like learning charisma or learning how to start a YouTube channel, learning how to rap, whatever you want. The realization is you can learn anything. But like I said, you got to meta learn. You got to learn how to learn. So when you're learning social skills, when you're learning charisma, it's a lot less about theory. You know, it's more about direct experience and actually putting yourself out there and making mistakes and getting experience. Meanwhile, something like maths is a lot more like learning concepts and trying to understand how things work from the bottom up. So every single skill is learned differently, but the more skills you learn, the better you get at learning overall. So this is why I think it's also great for every, like if you're like me and you like, you know, making progress in your life, then it's also good to have your own ultra learning project that you're working on in your spare time outside of school. So maybe you're learning, you know, social skills. You're, you know, practicing socializing with the people in your class or whatever. You're improving your social skills, your charisma. Maybe you're building a fitness habit. You know, you're getting into the gym. You're learning how to lift weights. You're learning how to eat properly. You're learning how to live a healthy life. Maybe, you know, you're trying to create something. You're creating, you know, if you're into programming, you're creating, you know, a video game. Maybe you're creating a YouTube channel. You're learning how to speak on camera. You're learning how to write. You're learning how to express your ideas. So it's good to have this ultra learning habit that you're working on like in the background outside of school. So you're learning how to learn and applying it on something that you can make progress on in your life. Because the beautiful thing about the modern day is that literally you can learn anything on the internet. You know, we think if you want to learn how to build a business, you got to do a business class. If you want to learn how to learn a language, you got to do a language class. But the reality is we can learn anything we want online. But the reason we struggle to learn, you know, social skills, the reason we struggle to learn, you know, how to rap, how to sing, all these things, is because we don't take step one, which is learning how to learn. And this is like one of the most freeing mindsets that if you can develop, you know, your life will completely change. Realizing that you can literally learn anything. I used to think I was like the most shy, introverted person in the entire world. And, you know, I'm still introverted or whatever, but I made reasonable progress in it. Because I started realizing that I can literally learn anything, and I can even learn how to, you know, talk to people, how to speak better. So step one is learning how to learn. So if you want to learn how to focus better and how I learn things much faster, go watch this video now. See you later.